Welcome to this part 10 of our project to create a purchase order system using Blazor and C#. This is where things start to get interesting. We're now going to start on the process of creating the purchase order form. It would be worthwhile, I think, reminding ourselves roughly what we're aiming at. The original purchase order input form that I sketched out looks like this. It consists of a header, what I'm describing as a header with information about the supplier, address, email address, order number, order date, and who requested it. In the top part of the form and in the bottom part of the form, the purchase order lines, where each particular line will have information about the product being ordered, the quantity, the unit price, the net total, the tax rate, the total tax and the total, and therefore the total order. But before we get to that, we need a method of actually accessing this. And what I've decided to do here is to provide a list of purchase orders, as we have done, for example, for products or suppliers, with buttons at the top to add, edit, or delete purchase orders. And then this purchase order list, which will be a Syncfusion data grid, will show the purchase order number, the order date, who the supplier was, and the total order value. So that's what we're going to be starting off with, or more precisely, after I've dealt with one other problem. Before we start on the C# code, there are a couple of changes I want to make to the SQL database. In my preparatory work, I found myself fighting against the foreign key constraints that we created when we originally added the database. And rather than work out why these are causing problems, I've decided to delete them. Finding out why they cause me problems, I think, might be a job for another day. The other clash that I encountered was that we originally defined the purchase order header order date to be of type date. Again, for unknown reasons, I found that the Syncfusion date picker worked better with a data type of date time. Therefore, I'm going to take the easy course of action and change the database so that that particular column is now date time. So if we now have a look at the SQL, we'll make those changes. So in SQL Management Studio, I've already got it open. We need to select the purchase order database. I've already got a script which you can get from the blazorcode.uk website. I'll put the link in the bottom anyway to make life a little bit easier for us. And what this is doing is altering the product table to remove the foreign key constraint of fkey product supplier. For PO header, I'm removing the foreign key PO header supplier. On the PO line, I'm dropping two foreign keys, the PO line header and the PO line product. I'm also deleting all the transactions from PO line and PO header. There shouldn't be any, but I'm removing them just in case. I'm then dropping the PO header table and then recreating it, this time with the order date as date time and not date. Then finally, I'm setting the defaults to 0 for PO header order number and PO header is archived. So let me just parse that and then execute it. As you can see, I didn't have any data in PO header and PO line. That's all done. We've dropped the foreign keys, so now we can get back to the Visual Basic code. As the project is about purchase orders, we're going to reuse the index page to show the list of purchase orders, which at the moment just has hello world and welcome to your new app. The initial problem is that we don't have any data. This is further compounded by the fact that the purchase orders comprise both purchase order headers and purchase order line records. You'll see here that we've got the order total. Now that comes from the order lines. So we're not going to be able to achieve that in the first instance. So we're going to be attacking this step by step. And in the first attempt, we'll limit ourselves to data from just the purchase order header table. So this is the index page. And to save time and having to watch me type out very slowly, I've prepared some data already. And this has got the page directive going to the root. We're using Blazor purchase orders data, and I'm injecting the PO header service and the navigation manager. This is the data grid. It's got a toolbar and it's got two columns, the purchase order number and the purchase order date. So I'm missing out the supplier and I'm also missing out the order total. I'm creating a IEnumerable called PO header and a list of toolbar items. And when the form opens, it's going to initialize the PO header list, and it's going to be adding the toolbar items for add, edit, and delete. The toolbar click handler has just got add, edit, and delete, and none of them do anything. So if you run this, I mean, it should be familiar. This is exactly the same pattern as we use for products and tax rates and suppliers. So if I run it, we get this. So it's a Syncfusion data grid with order number and date. We've got no records, and add, edit, and delete don't do anything. So let's have a look at improving that so it does actually function. The purchase order form is going to consist of a header section recording the supplier information, order number and date, and who requested the order. And under the header section, we'll have the details section for the order lines. And this is going to be a Syncfusion data grid. But before we add the data grid for the lines, we're going to get the header working, including recording data to the database. So the first thing we need to do is create a new form. The way I propose that this is working is that when the user selects add here, that we open a new form to capture the data. And we're going to do that by going to Pages, right-click, Add, raise a component, and we're going to call this Purchase Order Page. .razor. This is the code that we get when we create a new Blazor page. I'm going to replace that with some I've already prepared, and it's dead simple. We've got a page directive going to purchase order and then the PO header ID as an integer. So that's going to be 0 if it's a new order, or 1 or whatever if we're editing an existing order. I'm injecting the navigation manager. I'm giving it a page title, which is going to default to add an order, and I'm passing in the parameter of PO header ID, which will then force this to open. Now, to get this to work on the index page, down here, we need to add code for directing it to that page if the user selects add. So the first thing we need to do, actually, is I've got it ready here, so we'll put that in. We set PO header ID to 0, and then we use the navigation manager to navigate to purchase order and then the PO header ID. We now need to define that, so I'll just copy that and up here at the beginning of the code. Let's have it under here. Just declare it up at the top. Right, so if we run that, I'll save it first and run it. If I select add, our very basic form opens, and we've got the purchase order route up here with 0 because we're adding a new product. Sorry, a new purchase order. So let's close that. Right, we now need to flesh out the purchase order page by adding the edit form section and then fleshing it out a bit. So let's have a look at that. We now need to add an edit form section to collect the header information from the user. The first item will be a drop-down list to allow the user to select a supplier. Once selected, the supplier address and email details will be read from the supplier table and added to the purchase order. Next, we need to record the order number. I propose that this is allocated automatically as the order is saved to the database, and until it is saved it will display 0. The order date can be entered by the user using a Syncfusion date picker, and lastly I propose that the requested by defaults to the current logged in user. I had originally thought this might be from a drop-down list of users, and we could well return to this in due course. However, before we add the automatic part, such as the completion of the supplier address, we'll place the drop-down list and other controls on the form. I have some code ready, so I'm going to replace this with the code here. So I've injected the supplier service and the supplier service and the supplier interface, and the edit form section uses a model called order add edit and has an event on valid submit of order save. And the drop-down list, the Syncfusion drop-down list, has a data source of supplier, which is defined down here as an I enumerable of supplier. The T item is going to be supplier, the T value is the integer, and the text is supplier ID. And we're going to bind it to the order add edit PO header supplier ID. We're going to have a label that floats automatically, and the placeholder is going to say select a supplier. And the drop-down field settings, the text is going to be supplier name and the value is the supplier ID. This all seems to be a bit of black magic to me, but it seems to work and I'm content with that. So the events we've got, the IEnumerable supplier provides the list of suppliers. We've defined a string page title of add an order. I'm just going to select to delete that, and it'll get filled in on the oninitialized. So the oninitialized event or method will populate the supplier from the supplier service and supplier list. If the PO header is 0, it'll add an order will be the title, otherwise it'll be edit. And the task or the method for order save, if the PO header is ID is 0, we'll save it. We haven't got anything in there at the moment, so it's just going to navigate back to the index page. Otherwise it's just going to go back to the index page, and if the user cancels, it's still going to go back to the index page. So let's have a look and see what that looks like. So let's save it. And now if we choose to add one, we've now got the supplier drop-down, which gets populated. So I can select a supplier there, and we've got the save button and cancel button, both of which just take us straight back to the index page. Right, we need a bit more on there than that, so let's have a look at that. Again, in the interest of time, I've got some text prepared. And this is just going to be saving a lot of typing more than anything else. So what we've got is a text box which says address, and we're going to bind it to the supplier address 1. Another text box that's going to be attached to supplier address 2. And notice that I've got float label type never. That's because I don't want I want the address to be as short as possible, as compressed as possible. Same with address 3 and postcode. Then we've got the email, the supplier, which is going to be linked to the supplier email address. The order number, which I've said is going to be 0 for the moment if it's a new order, and that's going to be linked to the PO header order number. Then we've got a Syncfusion date picker, which is going to be linked to the order date, and lastly the requested by, which is going to be who within our organization has requested it. So let's save that and give that a run. If I select add now, you'll see that we've now got the form with supplier. I can select the supplier. It doesn't populate any of this yet. The order number is set to 0. The order date is this date picker, but it's got an invalid, it defaults to a totally invalid date. But I can change that to, for example, today. It might be nice if that was defaulted to today, and requested by is currently still totally blank. So let's cancel that, close, and go back to our code. So the next stage, I think, is to populate the supplier address. And that's triggered when the user selects something from the Syncfusion drop-down list. So this we need to place in the drop-down list events. So we can put it in here. Drop-down list events. Supplier and the T value is equal to int. And value change looks at an event or a method, and we're going to call that on change supplier. So now we need the on change supplier method. So let's go down a little bit further, find ourselves a bit of space. We'll have it after the on initialized. So private void and this uses the Syncfusion Blazor drop-down change events. Syncfusion dot Blazor dot drop-downs dot change event args, and it's an integer because it's the supplier ID coming from supplier. And let's just deal with one to start off with. So this dot order add edit dot po supplier address 1 equals args dot item data dot supplier address 1. I should have a comma in there. So let's see if that works. So I'll just run that. Yep, that seems to work. So that, having got it working on that, we'll fill in the others, which is copy and paste basically. So we want address 1, 2, 3, postcode. And we want the same for email as well. So that should populate the those fields for the addresses and email. The, the as we saw, the date was set to an invalid date, so we can change that by putting on the on initialized item here. We can put order at edit dot po header order date, and we can just change that to now. Let's save that and run it. So that looks good. We've got the address coming through, the email, the order number is still 0. It's putting in the current date, which happens to be the 15th of February, and requested by is still blank. So we've still got that to tackle. So let's have a look at that. Adding the requested by took a fair bit of investigation on my part, and I claim no responsibility for this at all, but this is what I discovered. If I insert this at the top, so using Microsoft ASP.NET Core Components Authorization, injecting the authentication state provider, and then adding using system and using system collections generic, that's required at the top. We then need to declare a private variable up here called username, private string username, and lastly on the initialize we want to enter this here. As I say, I won't claim to understand this even, but it's getting the identity of the user, and if the user identity name is returned, we complete that into the username, and then we put that into the add edit requested by. Otherwise, if that's not authenticated, then we put in the user is not authenticated. We'll try it once more and see if this gets completed. Select add, and I'm not logged in, so the user is not authenticated. Let me cancel that, and I'll log in. Right, I'm now logged in, and I automatically get the requested by completed. So this looks as if it's all going in the right direction, but there's one problem, and that's basically it looks awful. I intended that the top part of it down to here should be on the left side of the form, and the order number, order date, and requested by should be on the right hand side, and that the flow, the tab sequence, should come down this side and then back up to the top and down the other. So let's see how we can change that. So I'll close that, and we'll have a look at the code. This involved some delving into CSS, and again, I'm no expert on that, but I did find a couple of very helpful websites, and I'll put the links to those in the description. But very briefly, what I found was that if I put in this code here immediately under the edit form, it says style, grid container, and then it displays it as a grid. And you'll see here it says a maximum width of 900 pixels and a grid template column, 1FR space 1FR. These are relative, so if you had 2, 1, then the left-hand column would be twice as wide as the right-hand column. And in fact, if I had 5FR, 5FR, they'd still be equal sized. Then I've defined a gap between the two grids of 75 pixels. So that's putting in the grid container, and what we need to then do is in here put in the grid container, and just to keep things straight, let's put in a closing div. So I'll copy that one and place it up here. Then we need a left-hand and right-hand column. So this is the left-hand column, and we want to put a closing div where we want the left-hand column to finish, which is after the email, and we want a right-hand column appearing before the right-hand column, and a closing one as well. So that should do it. Let's save it and have a look. So we now select a supplier. We get the address down the left-hand side, order number, order date defaults to today's date, and requested by is defaults to me as I'm now logged in. Fine. Save still doesn't do anything, and cancel still doesn't. Well, cancel takes us back to here, so that does work. So let's have a look at what we need to do to save the record. Now, at this stage, it's only going to be the PO header data that's saved, but as part of that, we need to allocate the order number. Now, we're going to start just by saving the record, and once that's successful, we'll look at allocating the next order number as it's saved. So the actual saving shouldn't be too tricky. So what we need to do is on the order save, where is it? Here we are, order save. If the PO header is 0, we need access equals, and we're just going to await the PO header service for the insert. Have I inserted that? No, we need to inject the PO header service, so I'll just copy that. So that should be okay. Let's try that. I'll save it, run it. Right. We'll add a new record. Select a supplier. That all gets populated. The order number is 0. Date defaults to today's date and requested by defaults to me. I click save and it saved it. But you'll see the order number here is 0. We can try adding another one. Let's choose a different supplier. Click save, and we're getting orders saved. So that's looking good. But we want to change this so this is actually assigned the next order number. So let's see how we can do that. And in fact, I think the best way of dealing with that is to tackle it at the SQL end of things. So let's close and we'll open SQL. Under programmability, an option to create a sequence, and we can use that sequence to allocate the next number. And the reason we want SQL to do it is that we want the system to always allocate the next order number, and there could be potentially multiple users adding orders simultaneously, and we want there to be no possibility that an order number is omitted or duplicate, and this sequence in SQL allows us to do that. So what we'll do is right click on sequence and select new sequence, next purchase order number, and we want it to start at 1 and we want it to increment by 1. I'm not going to bother putting minimum or maximum values in there, that will default. So if I click OK, that we've now got this next order number being created. Next, we need to change some of the SQL. So on the stored procedure for insert, we want to modify that, and we need to get rid of this parameter PO header order number, because we're not going to be getting that from the C# program, we're going to be getting it from SQL. And as you can see, we've now got this problem in here. So we want to remove that. And the bit the bit that we want in there is to replace that with next value for next purchase order number. So I will execute that to change the stored procedure, but we need to make some changes in the code as well. So back in here in the purchase order header service, we don't need this parameter for purchase order number being passed in, so I'll just comment out that line, and we should be able to run the project, and it should allocate the next purchase order number. So let's try adding one. Order number up there is 0. Click Save, and we've got order number 1. Add another. Order number 2. So we've now got the purchase order numbers going up in sequence and being allocated to the system. So let's close that. That I think is as far as we'll go in this video. I feel it's probably getting quite long now, but I will just finish off with one item. I'll close that. And what I find during testing, we've now got 4 orders in there, but with no order lines. I find it very helpful just to clear out some of this purchase order data. So hopefully I haven't. I thought I got a script to delete them and reset the next purchase order number, but it's not too difficult. Let's do it by hand. So new query, and we want to use purchase orders. Then we want to delete from PO header. Then we want to delete from PO line. And this is the bit that counts. We want to alter sequence next purchase order number. And then say restart with 1. Alter sequence next order. Right, and then go. Parse it, execute it. So we've deleted the headers, no rows there. So we're now back to square one. And if we run it again, we'll see we haven't got any purchase orders there. So that's fine. So next time we'll have a look at adding purchase order lines. Thank you very much. The code for all this will be in the comments section, together with some other websites that I found very useful in getting this purchase order form working to this stage. Thank you very much.